Okay guys, welcome back. In our final video on topic 7.10, the New Deal, we're going to begin by looking at Social Security. And I would be curious how many of us actually have our Social Security number memorized. I bet some of us do. Some of us probably have no idea. And you may not even know why you have a number associated with you. Like, what is this Social Security number? What is Social Security? You've heard of it, but you may not know anything about it. And it is a program that is a legacy of the New Deal. So the Social Security Act of 1935 did a lot of stuff. It established the Social Security Administration, or SSA. The Social Security Administration is going to oversee this program of unemployment insurance. And what unemployment insurance means is while you're employed, they're going to deduct some of your paycheck to give back to this Social Security Administration. So again, if you have a job, you already know that. You've seen your check. They take out Social Security. They're also taking out money from your employer as well. And collectively, what you're doing is you're paying into this pool of money. And this pool of money does a lot of stuff. Whatever Social Security does, this is where that money's coming from. And part of that money is insurance in the sense that if you lose your job, you can draw on this unemployment benefit between jobs. So, it's not going to be your full salary or anything, but it's going to at least help a little bit and to kind of get you between those two jobs. Another thing that the Social Security Act does is it established monthly payments for retirees. Okay, so when you reach a certain age, and there's different levels where you can start to get your Social Security. I think full benefits now, maybe 67, 68, I'm not quite sure, 69, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure you can start drawing at least at 65, and that was the original threshold, by the way, was 65. You would receive money from the government. Now, this is not just free money. Again, this is money that, frankly, you've already paid in through the Social Security Act. When they take that money out of your check, that's going into paying for this, and you're getting that money back. This was to encourage, originally, a lot of older people to go ahead and retire and get out of the job force to free up jobs for younger Americans. But it was also a reflection on the fact that elderly people lived often in poverty back then, and so this would give them at least a little bit to live on. Not a lot. No one's getting rich off Social Security, guys, but it's, it'll help you meet your bare minimums. The Social Security Act also established assistance for disabled Americans. So if you become disabled, the Social Security Administration can provide you with benefits. And again, where's this money coming from? It's coming from employees and employers. And you will know this when you get a job. Now, what's interesting about the Social Security Act is originally applied, to people who are 65. That's when you started to get your benefits at age 65. That also happened to be the life expectancy back then. So getting Social Security benefits was not exactly a guaranteed thing, and it was certainly not something you were going to live on for decades, unlike today, because life expectancy now is so much higher. This is one of the reasons Social Security is struggling in the modern era, and frankly, I'm not sure if it'll be around for you guys to draw on one day. All right, now let's get into the court packing plan. So if you remember, we've seen two New Deal programs already cut down by the Supreme Court. We had the NRA and the AAA, both struck down by the Supreme Court. And Franklin Roosevelt, not happy about that, right? He wants to do something to avoid this from happening again in the future. So Franklin Roosevelt comes to see the Supreme Court as basically an obstacle in his path to creating more and more New Deal programs. Now, the Supreme Court at this time was, frankly, rather conservative, and it was also, frankly, old. Okay, 6 out of the 9 justices were over age 70. And remember, 70 in the 1930s is much older than 70s in the modern era. I mean, this is basically the equivalent of 80s or maybe even 90s, so elderly justices. And so FDR sees an opportunity here. He asks Congress for power to add new justices to the Supreme Court. Basically, his plan was for every justice over 70 who refused to retire, he asked Congress to give him the authority to appoint someone else in addition to that Supreme Court justice. And of course, obviously, the Supreme Court justices that FDR would appoint would be people who were sympathetic to the New Deal and not looking to rule everything he does unconstitutional. Now, this is something that FDR really doesn't prepare the public or Congress for. He just kind of throws this out here. Hey, guys, give me more power over the Supreme Court. And it turns out that Congress and the public were not happy about this. Okay, they don't like the idea of court packing. Congress and the public simply say, listen, FDR, that's too much. FDR, if you recall at this time, is already basically running Congress because Congress was so loyal to him. And then to give him power over the judiciary as well really means that checks and balances are not there, that FDR becomes almost dictatorial, right? That was the great fear, that by limiting the Supreme Court's independence and having it basically under the purview of the FDR administration means that there really aren't any limits on what he can do. And that is not the way we do things here in America. So in the end, he does not get the power to replace the Supreme Court justices like he wanted. And in fact, he really does squander a lot of his political will, because people had given FDR a lot of leverage, or a lot of leniency, I should say, a lot of freedom to kind of do what he wants. And now a lot of people are starting to second guess that, like, well, I don't know, maybe FDR's kind of lost, his place. Maybe he's trying to, take over too much power. Is he getting too personally ambitious? Is he trying to become a Mussolini type figure? Like, we've got to put checks and limits on the presidency going forward. Which brings us now to the critics of the New Deal. So we're going to look at the critics first, and then we're going to look at people who support the New Deal, and then we're going to try to figure out whether the New Deal really worked the way it was supposed to. So, a couple of problems or criticisms of the New Deal. One major criticism of the New Deal was that the federal government got way too big, way too involved in people's economic and political decisions. It was full of waste, full of corruption, that you have a bunch of unelected bureaucrats having way too much power over the national policy. There were also a lot of criticisms that basically what the New Deal was simply a stepping stone towards socialism and then ultimately to communism. Social security, right? It's got the word social in there. It must be bad. I don't mean to make too much of a joke of it. There really were some dedicated socialists and even some communists who were in the FDR administration who, thought of this maybe as a way of trying to push America further and further left down the line. It certainly wasn't widespread, and it certainly wasn't something that everybody believed in, but there were elements there. And sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, as people say. That was the theory. Here's a political cartoon kind of criticizing the New Deal as being too utopian, too communistic, favoring redistribution of wealth. And of course, the idea of redistributing wealth is something that we still talk about in American politics today. It's still pretty controversial, has its supporters, has its critics. Another problem with this was people feared that the government was simply spending way, way, way too much, and they weren't truly spending it wisely. In other words, they're just throwing money around and not really figuring out what works or what doesn't. They're just spending money to spend money. And of course, that money is not just made up monopoly money, right? The money is the hard work of taxpayers who's going to fund these experiments, for lack of a better word. Another problem, another criticism was that with the FDR administration comes a whole lot of uncertainty. Which new program is he going to come up with next? Which program is going to be in place and then get ruled unconstitutional? What new taxes are going to be put into place? And these are things that businessmen and investors hate because they like stability, they like predictability, and they didn't feel like they got enough of that with the New Deal. Finally, another major criticism of the New Deal was that with the New Deal, it set the precedent that when it comes time for national emergencies, the federal government was going to be there to assist the people. And so that the fear was that people will grow too reliant on the government, that their work ethic and entrepreneurship will be dampened because they know the government's always there ready to pick up for them at the first sign of trouble. And therefore, with this safety net is always there. I don't need to really try because someone's always going to catch me. And then I think the final and most damning criticism of the New Deal is the fact, and this is undeniable, it did not end the Great Depression. In fact, what's actually going to happen with the Great Depression is there's going to be almost like two waves. So there's going to be the initial Great Depression. The New Deal helps somewhat to relieve some of the problems. And then it kind of runs out of steam. And then there's a second wave, and the Great Depression gets worse. And it just does not fix what it was set out to fix. So I think a very fair criticism of the New Deal is that it didn't actually do what it was advertised it was going to do. All right, what about the defenders of the New Deal? What's up with them? Well, they would be people who would defend the New Deal because they would say that it's helping relieve people's suffering. And I think it did a lot of that. It helped give people self-confidence. It helped provide people with dignity. In other words, rather than being panhandlers on the side of the road, they're going to get a job in the CCC or the WPA. And that's going to give them confidence, give them dignity, and that's something you really can't put a dollar sign on. This is another way of saying basically that, well, maybe the New Deal didn't end the Great Depression, but maybe it made it better than it would have been, right? It would have been a far worse Great Depression had it not been for the New Deal. That's another defense of this program. Another interesting defense of the New Deal is that at the same time that we're going through these economic crises here at home, other countries were falling to dictatorships, right? So Mussolini is securing his control on Italy at this time. Hitler is rising to power in Germany. Japan is becoming increasingly imperialistic over in Asia. So at the same time democracy looked frankly doomed in other countries, it didn't disappear here. And so therefore, maybe the New Deal actually saved capitalism from itself, ironically enough, perhaps. All right, guys, I know that was a ton of information. We have covered so much ground here as we looked at the FDR's New Deal. It's not important that you know every single program in the New Deal, and frankly, a lot of them we left out, but definitely have working knowledge of some of the big ones, okay? I would definitely know the difference between the WPA and the CCC. I would know maybe what happened to the NRA and that kind of thing. So look for the big stories within this and look at the sort of the final tally. You know, did the Great Depression end because of the New Deal or not? What were FDR's successes and setbacks? Those are the kind of things I would look at as you review this very, very, very big topic in American history.